Hey everyone, Cameroni here with some build showcases for POE1 before I start prepping for the POE2 League. This is the first showcase. This is a cast on crit Saboteur, doing Absolution, stacking minion damage, stacking some spectres, stacking some heralds, stacking whatever I feel like, because I wanted to try a bunch of new things, and so that's what I did. Is it good? Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's good. Is it great? No. No, it's not, especially for how expensive it was to get set up. But I did learn a lot from it, and I am excited to iterate on it the next time I decide to do a cast on crit build. Probably next week. So, I've done a ton of experimenting these past few weeks. I've tried numerous skills, defensive layers, and whatnot for cast on crit and for builds in general, just because I'm trying to branch out and learn more stuff. My main focus at first was on the new wing of the wyvern bow. I wanted to make it work. I really did. I wanted it to be good. And after several hundred div burned, several days burned, and brainstorming sessions with a bunch of people smarter than I, we have come to the conclusion that this bow is just not good. I won't go into too much detail on it, but the gist of it is it's really hard to freeze enemies because you have to freeze them with an attack with the bow, which means that you need to scale your attack damage up instead of scaling your spell damage as much as you could, so the trigger's not that good. And then when you do freeze an enemy, you have to wait for them to unfreeze before you can freeze them again. So even if you go Warden for that sick freezing tech, it freezes them for 2 seconds, which means that you can't trigger it again for 2 seconds. It's not good, sadly. So I decided to go a more traditional cast on crit route instead. And I gotta say, this build is a lot of fun to play. As for how much I've invested, I did a very quick and rough math session, and I think I've spent around 1,000 divines on this. So it's definitely not worth how much you have to invest. But I can get it going for a lot cheaper now that I know what I'm doing, and I'd probably do a different Ascendency, which I will get into more later. And like I said earlier, I'm not going to put all my scrapped ideas in here. I'll just cover the most important parts of the build whilst showcasing my CoC Absolution, Spectre stacking, Herald stacking monstrosity. Moving on to Ascendancies. Sabo has these 2 really excellent Ascendancy points for cast on crit. Trigger bots mean twice as many spells, which means twice as much screen cancer, and 40% CDR with a level 5 awakened cast on crit gets you to a fantastic CDR breakpoint all on its own. The first idea was for defenses. I went with the blind node here for less damage and some more evasion, and then I went with a Spectre bloodline node here on the Katarina bloodline. I have 10 spectres, which means 100% increased global defenses, and it was quite strong. I had almost 12,000 ES, I had a bunch of armor and evasion. It's pretty tanky. But the recovery was pretty bad. I have not been able to solve the issue of recovery on this build at all. If any of you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them, but I digress. My current iteration ditches those extra sexy defenses since they weren't helping me much anyway, what with my lack of ES recovery, so I decided to see if I could just kill things before they kill me. Alas, that also hasn't worked much. I do get a ton of damage, but not as much as I thought, which moves us into damage scaling. We scale damage on this build with increases to minion damage. Absolution is a beast like that. Originally, I was also going to have some sweet overlaps with Woke Cascade to also scale damage, but cast on crit will always put the center of your cast on the tanky mob that you're trying to kill. And I found out that no matter how much AoE you have on Absolution, you'll always get just one hit in the exact center on normal-sized mobs, since increasing your AoE also increases the spread of the skill pattern with Awakened Spell Cascade. So while it looks awesome with Woke Cascade, the single target was just too bad, so I ditched it. We got good clear with Heralds and Explosions anyway, plus my Spectres are kind of monsters all on their own. We're converting the other 50% of Absolution, since Absolution by itself converts 50% of the physical damage to lightning, and we're converting the other 50% to chaos with Unholy Might, or we would be if I ever decided to fix my gloves. So I'm actually converting some of it to cold and some of it to chaos, but it's supposed to be all chaos, so we'll just pretend that we're converting it all to chaos. And we're applying Wither on hit as well with Unholy Might. We're getting Unholy Might from a Cluster Jewel. It's just one notable, pretty easy. We're also getting a ton of physical as extra other damage. With Herald of Ash, you get it as extra fire. With Hatred, we get it as extra cold. And then we're using the Lycia bloodline now instead of the Katarina bloodline for more tasty crit chance because of Zealotry creating profane ground. Also, I have a sulfur flask in there. I don't need it. I did check this. With Cyclone, you're standing on top of the rare mobs anyway, and there will always be profane ground on rare mobs because you're always critting them. So you'll always have that. The enemy will always be on it, so long as you have Zealotry. So you don't need the sulfur flask, but I have it just to make myself feel better, and I had an open flask slot. And I was using Orioth's End, but part of my leeching problem that I discovered is that I don't leech from the explosions from Orioth's End, so I hit a lot fewer enemies because they're all dying to explosions, which means I'm not recovering as much, so I ditched it. Anyway, so the Lycia bloodline, we get tasty crit chance, we get profane ground, we get this other node here that converts 50% of elemental damage to chaos like a mini original sin. When I get actual original sin, I'll go for the herald stacking one instead. So 50% of all of the physical as extra, and all of the physical that's converted to elemental damage is now getting converted to chaos as well. In case you don't know how damage conversion and damage scaling works in POE1, quick rundown. When you have a physical skill like Absolution, and you convert you convert some of that damage to elemental damage, if you scale physical damage, it's going to apply to that, and then it's going to apply to whatever you convert to. So say you have 100% physical, you convert that all to lightning, your increases to physical damage apply before it gets converted to lightning, and then your lightning increases get applied to what's converted. And then say you convert it again, like we are to chaos, those increases to lightning damage apply before it's converted to chaos, so that your increases to chaos damage are even bigger. Since, for instance, say you do 1,000 physical damage, you increase your physical damage by 20%, that's 1,200 physical damage. You convert that all to lightning, it's 1,200 lightning damage, you get 20% again. You would think that it would be 1,400, but no, it's actually 1,440 damage. So you're getting an extra 40 damage from that 20%, and these are really low numbers. PoE has much bigger numbers than this. And you convert that 1,440 to chaos, and say you have 50% increased chaos damage. That would be, so that 1,440 with 50% increased chaos damage becomes 2,160. So you can see how if you start increasing the base, convert it to each of the others, you get a lot of damage, yeah. Different in PoE2, unfortunately, but in PoE1 it goes crazy. Same with Fizz's extra. It follows the same pattern. So, anyway, back to damage scaling. We're also scaling our damage with Herald stacking. With Herald of the Hive, we have 5 Heralds. I increase the effect of their buffs on the passive tree. I will also take the Lycia Herald node like I talked about earlier when I get Original Sin. And Herald of the Hive also increases my damage based on how many Heralds I have. It's pretty sick. There's some more tech with this that I'll explain at the end when I talk about things that I would change next time I do this build. But we'll move on. We're also scaling our damage with Spectres. Spectres give a ton of useful auras and effects. I got them all in the config in the POB if you want to look. I won't talk about all of them for my 10 Spectres here, but that's what they do. That said, they also share a lot of my frustrations that I have with Golem stacking, in that when the Spectres die, you lose those buffs, and if you depend on them, you die. The AoE on their buffs is also quite small sometimes, so you constantly have to have them nearby. That's not as big of an issue for me now, since with a high-level convocation on automation, they flock to me fairly often, but it's still kind of annoying, because I do outrun their buffs on occasion. The upside is we're scaling minion damage, so the Spectres actually clear quite well by themselves, and do, I wouldn't say they do insane damage, I wouldn't even say they do good damage, but they do alright damage. And they also take a lot of aggro for me. The last part of our damage scaling is crit and crit multi, since we're cast on crit and need 100% crit chance, it makes sense. Cast while channeling would also work if you don't want to scale crit, and if you don't want to worry about getting 100% crit chance, but with our setup, getting 100% crit is so easy, we might as well. Especially with the Hatred Watcher's Eye, the Profane Ground, or even if you're doing Consecrated Ground with a Bottled Faith flask, it's just so easy to get 100% crit. I should also mention that since the only aura we're running is Hatred, you can use a Sublime Vision Hatred Jewel for Brittle and increased effective Hatred. I was doing that before I went with the Lycia Bloodline to cap my crit chance. I didn't need Brittle or increased effective Hatred, so I just dropped a Jewel socket on the right side of the tree and got rid of the Sublime Vision. But that is another option if you want more crit chance if you want Brittle. On to defenses. We get most of our defenses from our spectres. They rarely ever die. I've only had them die in Simulacrum and on tier 17 maps that have the remove 5% of health and ES on hit mod. Or if I'm doing content that has a ton of AoE and just damage everywhere, like Harbinger Beyond, which is what I'm doing right now, you'll see some of my spectres die. But for the most part, they stay alive pretty well. We are also stacking Energy Shield and Global Defense modifiers from our Amulet and Staff Mastery. And if you go with the Katarina Bloodline like I went with originally, with 10 Spectres, you also get 100% increased Global Defenses there. And since we're getting a bunch of armor and evasion and Energy Shield from our Spectres, that we get almost 200% increased effective Global Defenses. So with the almost 200% increased effective Global Defenses that we get, it leads to a lot of armor, a lot of ES, and a lot of Energy Shield. If I were to change this in the future, I'd probably not do the 10 Spectre setup and maybe ditch the staff for a dagger and a shield, so I can easily get max block and spell block, or maybe do an Aegis Aurora and do armor ES for the defenses so recovery isn't such a big problem. And as I've mentioned, having all of this armor and evasion and Energy Shield is awesome, but I start getting hit, and I am not recovering my Energy Shield as much as I should, so recovery on block would probably help me a lot. So to get that, I'd probably be alright with a bit less armor and evasion and Energy Shield with block and recovery, since your defenses only do so much if you can't recover your ES pool in a reasonable amount of time. I have looked into maybe just going full ES recharge and faster start of recharge, since that seems to be what helps me the most to stay alive, but I'm unsure as of yet. For how my build is currently, that may be the best way for me to go. I am a bit confused on the recovery here, though, since I should be getting good ES recovery from my Watcher's Eye mod, and I tried it with 3,000 ES leech per second with instant leech, so I don't know if my ES cost on Absolution is just canceling out a bunch of my leech, or if I'm not triggering casts often enough for the ES leech to happen, or what the deal is. All I know is that when I have my ES leech on Ice Nova, like even if I only have 1,000 ES leech on Ice Nova, it feels 4 times better, or 5 times better than my 3,000 ES leech on this build. I think it may have something to do with explosions and with heralds. I don't know if their explosions killing things means that my Absolution doesn't hit them, so I don't leech. I know that the Orioth's End explosion was hurting me in that regard, which is why I dumped it, so I'm not quite sure. I'm sure my leech and damage issues are probably related to each other, but again, I'm too dumb to figure it out. So if you know, I'd love to hear. Some other changes I'd make in the future on this. Obviously, I'd go Witch instead of Shadow, which is the best, in case you didn't know. And I was excited for the screen cancer from all the Absolutions everywhere with Woke Spell Cascade and Trigger Bots, but alas, it just wasn't meant to be. If I go Elementalist, I could still get 4 to 5 Spectres, maybe do a Hungry Loop Ring for the Spectre setup, do a Golem setup, still get all of my Sentinels, and maybe even do a 5th Golem for the Transcendent Stone Golem tech. So if I do that, it would be 5 Golems plus 5 Spectres, plus 5 Wolves, because I do the Feral Bloodline, 4 Heralds of Purity, 2 Absolution Sentinels, and that's 21 total minions, which is 82% increased global defenses from the Bone Meld Amulet. I'd also get more AoE, and I can take the Herald stacking node on Elementalist, so that's a strong contender. If I go Occultist, I'd probably do Fizz to Lightning to Cold, converting with Call of the Brotherhood Rings and scale all of the elemental damage. Or I could still convert things to Chaos. I'm not sure what I would do on Occultist, but that is a strong contender as well. And if I go Necromancer, since we're scaling minions a lot here, I could do some sick offering tech. which would help me and all my minions. Necromancer's another strong contender. All of these are better than trigger bots, sadly. I just need to get some CDR on which should be fairly easy to do, especially if we still have grafts. I reiterate that I would definitely go block and recover on block with maybe some mana leech, with cyclone and some mana cost reduction, so I don't have to cast from my ES pool. And if I don't need the Spectre helmet, I could use an 8-link Demon Crown as well for the cast on crit setup, which would be even more damage. I'd get attack speed from, not from my Spectres like I am currently, but from scaling minion attack speed and taking the spiritual command node on the passive tree. That plus the wolves should get me enough attack speed. And then my attack speed will be consistent, which will help me dial in the trigger numbers, because it's not super consistent right now with the Spectres. I'd also consider going Lancing Steel with Spraying, or whatever it is people use instead of Cyclone. I have never done either with a cast on crit build. Only cast on crit I've done before this is Tornado Shot. So I thought I'd start with the OG CoC trigger skill. I'm not going into the cast on crit mechanics in this video, and how you want your attack speed to be a certain amount with certain CDR breakpoints. There are other videos if you want to know more on that, or find a Reddit article. Some other miscellaneous notes. The power charge ring is a placeholder. I stole it from my witch, and it's really not doing a whole lot for this build. If you decide to copy me exactly, which I don't recommend doing, don't worry about forking out the cash for a power charge ring. Save up for Original Sin instead. I don't need or even want the cold convert on the gloves. That's a leftover artifact from my wing of the wyvern testing, and I spent too much currency getting the 60% on gloves to re-roll it, so that it's staying there. Headhunter is probably a better belt for this when mapping, other than Mage Blood. But the build glue from flasks is just too good with Mage Blood, so that's why I've been using it. Especially when I'm starting out a new build, so that I know what to work on in the next iteration if I don't want to use Mage Blood. And that's about it for this showcase and really lengthy explanation. I refuse to call it a build guide because it's not in a state that I would recommend making this build, especially for how expensive it is. But I do think that there are some good and unique ideas here that could be worked on and iterated on, so I'm excited to see how it plays out for me in the future as I keep working on it. And I'm excited to see what other people take from this to apply to their own builds. And as always, if you have ideas, suggestions, constructive criticism, or just want to say hi, please leave it in the comments below, or hop into my Twitch chat if you see me streaming, and I'll catch you next time.